The day Thomas Brennan found the tunnel beneath his barn was the day he stopped believing the world made any sense at all. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let me tell you how a simple rancher from the Arizona Territory discovered something that would shake everything he thought he knew about his land, his family, and himself. Thomas had inherited the property from his father 3 years prior in the spring of 1881. The old man had worked that land for 40 years, raised cattle, fixed fences, and never once mentioned anything unusual about the place. It was honest work on honest ground, or so Thomas had always believed. The ranch sat in a valley between two red rock mesas, about 15 miles outside of Prescott, remote enough to discourage casual visitors, close enough to town to sell beef when the herd was ready. The barn in question had been there longer than Thomas himself. His grandfather had built it back in the 40s, using timber hauled from the mountains and stones pulled from the creek bed. It leaned slightly to the east now, weathered by decades of wind and summer storms, but it still served its purpose. Thomas kept his tools there, some hay for the winter, and occasionally sheltered a sick calf or two. On this particular morning in late September, Thomas was moving some old crates in the back corner of the barn when he heard it, a hollow sound beneath his boots, different from the usual solid thud of packed earth. He stopped, shifted his weight, and listened. There it was again, a definite hollowness like stepping over a covered well. He knelt down and brushed away the dust and straw with his hand. The floorboards here were older than in other parts of the barn, darker wood that had absorbed years of moisture and heat. But one section looked different, cleaner edges, deliberate cuts. Thomas realized these boards had been placed here intentionally, meant to be removed. His heart began to beat faster. You don't live in the Arizona Territory without hearing stories. Lost Spanish gold, Apache treasure caves, outlaws who buried their stolen loot before the law caught up with them. Thomas had always dismissed such tales as campfire nonsense, the kind of thing men told each other over whiskey when the nights got long. But now, kneeling in his own barn with his fingers tracing the edge of a hidden door, those stories didn't seem quite so foolish. It took him 20 minutes to pry up the boards. Whoever had sealed this entrance had done so carefully, using long nails that had rusted into the wood. When the final plank came free, Thomas sat back and stared into the darkness below. A hole, roughly 4 feet square, with crude wooden steps leading down into absolute blackness. The air that rose from it was cool and damp, carrying a mineral smell like the inside of a cave. Thomas called down into it. "Hello?" His voice echoed strangely, suggesting the space below was larger than just a simple root cellar. He waited, but only silence answered back. He should have walked away, filled the hole back up, and forgotten about it. That would have been the sensible thing to do. But Thomas Brennan had never claimed to be an entirely sensible man, and the mystery of that dark hole pulled at him like a fish on a line. Besides, this was his land, his barn. He had a right to know what lay beneath it. He fetched 2 oil lanterns from the house, made sure they were full, and returned to the barn. The sun was high now, streaming through the gaps in the walls, but down in that hole the light didn't reach. Thomas lit both lanterns, hung one from a hook on his belt, and held the other in his left hand. Then, taking a deep breath, he descended into the darkness. The wooden steps creaked under his weight, but they held. 8 steps down, then 9, then 10. The temperature dropped with each one. When his boots finally touched solid ground, Thomas raised the lantern and looked around. What he saw made him forget to breathe for a moment. He was standing in a tunnel, not a natural cave, but a man-made passage carved through solid rock. The walls were smooth, almost polished, and the ceiling arched overhead at least 7 feet high. The tunnel stretched away in both directions, disappearing beyond the reach of his lamplight. But what truly caught his attention were the walls themselves. They were covered in markings. Thomas stepped closer, holding the lantern up. The markings weren't random scratches or idle graffiti. They were symbols, hundreds of them, carved with precision into the stone. Some looked almost like letters, but from no alphabet he recognized. Others were geometric patterns, circles within circles, triangles intersecting at strange angles. And there were images too. Human figures with elongated limbs, animals that might have been horses or deer, but distorted somehow, wrong, and everywhere, recurring again and again, a spiral pattern that seemed to draw the eye inward. His father had never mentioned this. His grandfather had never spoken of it. Yet here it was, beneath the barn that had stood for 40 years, a secret passage decorated like some ancient temple. Thomas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool underground air. He chose to go right, walking slowly, keeping one hand on the tunnel wall. The passage ran straight for about 50 yards, then began to curve gently to the left. More symbols covered every surface. Thomas noticed that some of them seemed to glow faintly in his lamplight, as if they'd been painted with some kind of phosphorescent material. When he touched one, his fingertip came away clean, no paint or residue. The glow was coming from within the stone itself. The tunnel opened suddenly into a chamber. Thomas stopped at the threshold, raising both lanterns high. The room was circular, perhaps 30 feet across, with a domed ceiling that rose into darkness above. In the center of the chamber stood a stone table, and on that table lay objects that made Thomas's breath catch in his throat. Artifacts, that was the only word for them. Things that had no business being in a tunnel beneath an Arizona ranch. There was a metal box, green with age, covered in more of those strange symbols. Beside it lay what looked like a ceremonial knife, its blade made from some black stone that gleamed in the lamplight. There were clay vessels, their surfaces painted with faded images, a staff carved from dark wood, topped with what might have been real gold, shaped into that same spiral pattern he'd seen on the walls, and books. 3 leather-bound volumes, their pages yellow and brittle with age. Thomas approached the table slowly, as if the objects might vanish if he moved too quickly. He set one lantern down and reached for the nearest book. The leather was soft, almost powdery under his fingers. He opened it carefully, and his confusion deepened. The pages were covered in handwriting, but not in English. Spanish, maybe. He could make out a few words here and there. Entrada, camino, pueblo, but most of it was beyond him. What he could understand were the drawings. Detailed sketches filled the margins and covered entire pages. Maps of the tunnel system, because now Thomas realized this chamber wasn't the end. There were more passages leading off in different directions, shown clearly in these old diagrams. There were drawings of the symbols from the walls, with notations beside them that looked like translations or explanations. And there were images of people, groups of figures gathered in underground chambers, their hands raised as if in prayer or supplication toward something the artist had drawn as a bright circle of light. Thomas carefully turned more pages, and a loose sheet of paper fell out. Newer than the book itself, the paper was still relatively white. The handwriting on it was different too, more modern, English this time, and in a hand Thomas recognized with a jolt that nearly made him drop the lantern. It was his father's writing. The note was dated June 1878, just a few months before his father had taken ill with the fever that would eventually claim him. Thomas held it close to the lamp and read, "To whoever finds this, likely my son, if the good Lord allows it. I discovered this place in the winter of 1841, 3 months after we built the barn. Thought it was an old Spanish mine at first, or maybe something the Apache had made. Been coming down here off and on for near 40 years now, and I still don't understand it all. The books say it's older than the Spanish, older than the Apache even, some kind of ancient people who lived here long before any of us. They built these tunnels for reasons I can't quite make out, but I think it had something to do with protection, or maybe hiding. The symbols, far as I can figure from comparing them to what's written in the books, there's some kind of warning, or maybe instructions. Been afraid to go too deep, afraid of what I might find, or what might find me. I've heard sounds down here sometimes, late at night when I've stayed too long. Footsteps that aren't mine, whispers in a language I don't know. Once I thought I saw a light moving in the far tunnels, but when I followed it, it vanished. I'm too old now to explore further. Leaving this for you, Thomas. Be careful. There's power here, old power, and I don't think it's meant for men like us to meddle with, but I couldn't bring myself to seal it up forever. Maybe you're braver than I was, or maybe wiser. Your choice now." Thomas read the note 3 times, his hands trembling slightly. His father had known. For 40 years the old man had kept this secret, coming down here alone, studying these artifacts, walking these tunnels, and he'd never said a word, not even at the end, when the fever had him, and he'd talked about so many things. He'd kept this to himself. A sound echoed through the chamber, a soft scraping like stone sliding against stone. Thomas spun around, holding the lantern high. The entrance tunnel behind him was empty. But one of the other passages, the one leading off to the north according to the maps in the book, that one seemed darker somehow, as if the shadows there were thicker, more solid. He should leave, take the note, maybe one of the books, and climb back up to the barn, board up the entrance, nail it shut, and forget any of this existed. That's what his father's warning suggested. That's what common sense dictated. But Thomas found himself walking toward that northern passage instead. Something was pulling him forward, a curiosity he couldn't quite explain. Or maybe it was something else. Maybe it was the same thing that had kept his father coming back down here for 4 decades. Despite his own warnings about whispers and moving lights, the northern tunnel was narrower than the main passage, and the ceiling was lower. Thomas had to duck his head in places. The walls here were rougher, less finished, as if whoever had carved this section had been in more of a hurry. The symbols continued, but they changed too. More urgent somehow, more chaotic. The spiral pattern appeared again and again, but now it was surrounded by what looked like human figures, dozens of them, all drawn running or fleeing from something. The tunnel descended, not steeply but steadily, taking Thomas deeper into the earth. He tried to keep track of the distance, counting his steps, but he lost count somewhere around 300. The air grew warmer instead of cooler, which struck him as strange, and there was a smell now, faint but distinct. Sulfur, maybe, or something like it. The mineral scent from earlier was stronger too, almost metallic on his tongue. The passage opened into another chamber, larger than the first. Thomas stopped at the entrance and stared. This room was different, natural, not man-made. A cavern with walls of rough stone that glittered in the lamplight. Crystals of some kind, thousands of them, covering every surface like frozen stars. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above, and the floor was uneven, sloping downward toward the far end where Thomas could hear water dripping. But what dominated the chamber was the structure in its center, a circular arrangement of stone pillars, 12 of them, each about 10 feet tall and carved with those same spiraling symbols. They were arranged around a central space, and in that space, set into the floor, was a pool of water. No, not water. The liquid was too thick, too dark. It didn't reflect his lamplight the way water should. Instead, it seemed to absorb the light, pulling it down into depths Thomas couldn't fathom. He walked closer, moving between 2 of the pillars. The symbols on them seemed to pulse as he passed, that same faint glow he'd seen in the tunnel walls. Up close, he could see that the pillars weren't just carved. They were inlaid with some kind of metal, thin threads of it following the spirals and patterns. Silver, maybe, or something that looked like silver. Thomas knelt at the edge of the pool and held the lantern over it. The dark liquid didn't move. No ripples, no current. It was perfectly still, like glass. He could see his reflection in it, distorted and strange. For a moment, just a moment, he thought he saw something else in the reflection, a face that wasn't his, looking up at him from beneath the surface. But when he blinked and looked again, there was only his own weathered features staring back. A voice spoke behind him. "You shouldn't be here." Thomas jumped to his feet, spinning around so fast he nearly dropped the lantern. A man stood between 2 of the pillars, old, maybe 70 or more, with long white hair pulled back from a face that was all sharp angles and deep lines. He wore clothes that might have been expensive once but were now worn and dusty, and his eyes, even in the uncertain lamplight, were a pale, pale blue that seemed to glow with their own light. "Who are you?" Thomas demanded, his hand moving instinctively to the revolver at his hip. The old man raised his hands, slowly, palms out. "Someone who's been waiting a very long time, and hoping no one else would find this place." His voice was soft, cultured, with an accent Thomas couldn't quite place. European, maybe. "This is my land, my barn, my tunnel." Thomas kept his hand on his gun, but he didn't draw it, not yet. The old man smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Your land, yes. But this was here long before your land existed, long before the United States, before the Spanish, before the people who built these chambers had a name anyone remembers." He stepped closer, moving with a grace that belied his apparent age. "My name is Daniel Carver, and I've been coming to this place for longer than you've been alive. My father never mentioned you. Your father was wise wise enough to leave when he'd seen enough. He understood that some secrets are better left alone. Carver glanced at the dark pool, and something like fear crossed his face. But you came deeper. You found the heart of it. Thomas looked at the pool, then back at Carver. What is this place? What's that? He gestured at the dark liquid. Carver was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed, a sound like wind through dead leaves. I don't know what to call it. A doorway, maybe. A window, something the old ones made when they realized their time was ending. They left it here, sealed it with those pillars and their symbols, and then they vanished. Most people think the ancient ones just died out or moved away, but I think they went somewhere else, through places like this. That's insane. Is it? Carver moved to one of the pillars and touched the metal inlay. Your father found books up there, didn't he? Old journals and records. Did you read them? Did you see what they described? The ancient people of this land had knowledge we've lost. They understood things about the world that we've forgotten or never knew. They built these chambers as passages, not just through space, but through something else, something deeper. Thomas felt his skin prickling. The rational part of his mind said this man was mad, that he should leave immediately. But another part, the part that had read his father's warning and seen the glowing symbols and felt the pull of this place, that part whispered that Carver might be telling the truth. If all that's true, Thomas said slowly, then why are you here? Why come back to this place? Carver's pale eyes met his. Because I made a mistake many years ago. I came down here just like you did. I found this chamber just like you did. And I looked into that pool, really looked, and I saw things, impossible things, other places, other times. And then, fool that I was, I touched it. He held up his right hand. In the lamplight, Thomas could see that Carver's skin had a strange quality to it, almost translucent. The veins beneath showed too clearly, and they were the wrong color, too dark, too blue. It marked me, Carver continued, changed me. I don't age the way I should. I don't sleep much. I don't need to eat as often as I once did. And I see things, even now, even up there in the sunlight, shadows that move wrong, patterns in everything. The world looks different after you touch what's in that pool. You're trying to scare me. I'm trying to save you. Carver's voice was urgent now. Leave this place. Board it up. Pour concrete into the entrance if you have to. But don't look into that pool. And for the love of God, don't touch it. I've spent 30 years trying to understand what happened to me, trying to find a way to reverse it. But there is no reversal. Once you're marked forever. Thomas looked at the dark liquid. It called to him. That was the only way to describe it. A pull deep in his chest, urging him to step closer, to reach down, to let his fingers break that perfect surface. He took a step toward it before he even realized he was moving. Carver grabbed his arm. Don't, please, I'm begging you. Thomas shook him off, but he stopped. The old man's fear was genuine. That much was clear. And his father's warning echoed in his mind. Old power, not meant for men like us. I'm not going to touch it, Thomas said, but I need to understand. If this is some kind of doorway, where does it go? Everywhere. Carver whispered. Nowhere. Somewhere that isn't here. I don't have words for it. The old ones did, probably, but we don't. When I touched it, when the change came over me, I saw for just a moment what they saw. A world beneath the world, or maybe beside it. A place where the rules are different, where time doesn't flow the way it should, where things that can't exist do exist, and they knew, the old ones, they knew how to move between. That's what these symbols are. Instructions, a map. If you could read them properly, really understand them, you could use this pool. You could go through. Through to where? Carver laughed, a bitter sound. That's the question, isn't it? I've spent 3 decades studying these markings, comparing them to every ancient language I could find, reading everything I could about the people who lived here before. And I've learned a little, enough to be dangerous. Enough to know that some of these passages, the deeper ones, they connect to other places like this, other pools, other doorways. You could walk from here to somewhere 1,000 miles away if you knew the way. Or 1,000 years away. The old ones built a network spread across the whole continent, maybe the whole world, and then they vanished through it, leaving only these markers behind. Thomas felt dizzy. The chamber seemed to spin around him. You're saying there are more of these places? Dozens, maybe hundreds, most of them lost or forgotten or sealed up, but some are still accessible, if you know where to look. I've found 3 others in my travels, never used them, never dared, but I've seen them, studied them. They're all the same. Circular chambers, stone pillars, a pool of that. He gestured at the dark liquid, and always the symbols telling the same story. The old ones made these passages, used them for generations, and then one day they just left. All of them, all at once, walked through these doorways and never came back. Why? I don't know. Maybe they were escaping something. Maybe they were going toward something. Maybe they simply realized they didn't belong in this world anymore. Carver looked tired suddenly, ancient. All I know is that touching what's in that pool changes you, makes you part of their world, their network. You start to see things differently, feel things differently. You're not quite human anymore, not in the way you were before, and you can never go back. Thomas stared at the pool. His reflection stared back, and this time he definitely saw something else moving beneath the surface. Shapes, indistinct and fluid, circling in the depths. He felt that pull again, stronger now, an urge to reach out, to dip his hand in, to join whatever mysteries lay below. I need to leave, he said abruptly. Right now. Carver nodded, relief washing over his face. Yes, good. Go, and seal the entrance. Don't let anyone else down here. Thomas turned away from the pool, started walking back toward the narrow passage. But he'd only taken a few steps when he heard it, a sound from deep below, from within that dark liquid. A splash, soft but distinct, like something rising to the surface. He looked back. The pool was moving now, rippling, waves spreading out from the center. And in the center, something was emerging, a shape, humanoid, but wrong. Its skin was the same dark color as the liquid, and it moved with a fluid grace that was beautiful and horrible at once. As Thomas watched, frozen in terror, the shape pulled itself from the pool and stood on the chamber floor. Water, or whatever that liquid was, streamed from its body. It had no face, no features at all, just a smooth surface where a face should be. But it turned toward Thomas as if it could see him perfectly. "Run!" Carver screamed. "Run now!" Thomas didn't need to be told twice. He bolted for the passage, his boots slipping on the uneven stone. Behind him he heard another splash, and another, more shapes emerging from the pool. Carver was shouting something in a language Thomas didn't recognize, words that hurt his ears to hear. There was a flash of light, painfully bright, in the darkness, and the smell of ozone. Thomas ran through the narrow tunnel, not caring when he hit his head on the low ceiling, not caring about anything except getting out. The lamplight bounced wildly, throwing manic shadows on the walls. Those spiral symbols seemed to spin as he passed them, and he could have sworn they were moving, following him. He burst into the circular chamber with the stone table, didn't stop, kept running. Into the main tunnel now, his lungs burning, his heart hammering. Behind him, he could hear them coming, not footsteps exactly, but something else. A wet sliding sound, like something moving without the need for legs. The wooden steps appeared ahead. Thomas grabbed the railing and hauled himself up, taking the stairs 3 at a time. His shoulder hit the frame of the opening, but he didn't feel the pain. He pulled himself up into the barn, into blessed daylight filtering through the walls, and immediately started dragging the boards back over the hole. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the nails, but he got them in place, hammering with a rock when he couldn't find his tools, sealing the entrance as best he could. From below came a sound, a wail, high and keening, like wind through a canyon, or like voices, many voices, all screaming at once. Thomas kept hammering. When the last board was in place, he collapsed against the barn wall, gasping for breath. His whole body was shaking. He could still hear that wailing, muffled now, but persistent. It went on for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then, gradually, it faded. Silence returned to the barn. Thomas sat there until the sun began to set, until the light through the cracks turned golden and then red. He couldn't move, couldn't think. His mind kept showing him those shapes emerging from the pool, that featureless face turning toward him. Eventually, he stood up. His legs were weak, but they held. He looked down at the boarded entrance. It seemed secure, but he knew it wasn't enough. Tomorrow he would buy cement. He would seal this hole so thoroughly that no one would ever know it had been there. He would do what his father should have done 40 years ago. But as he walked toward the barn door, Thomas felt something, a tingling in his right hand. He looked down, and his stomach dropped. His palm, where he'd touched the wall of the chamber to steady himself while he ran, was discolored. A faint blue tint, almost imperceptible in the dim light. And when he looked closely, really looked, he could see the pattern there. Spirals, tiny spirals, etched into his skin like tattoos, but he hadn't been tattooed. They were there, beneath his skin, part of him now. Thomas stumbled out of the barn and sank to his knees in the yard. He understood now. Carver had tried to warn him. His father had tried to warn him, but it was too late. He'd touched the walls. He'd been in that place, and now it was in him. Over the following days, the changes came slowly. Thomas slept less. Food tasted strange, sometimes like ashes, sometimes like nothing at all, and he saw things, patterns everywhere. In the clouds, in the dirt, in the way the grass grew. The whole world was covered in invisible spirals, and now he could see them. At night he heard whispers, not from the barn, which he'd sealed with 3 bags of concrete and heavy stones. The whispers came from the land itself, from the earth and the rocks and the ancient roots of the mountains. They spoke in that language he didn't understand, but he found himself understanding it a little more each day. A week after his descent into the tunnel, Thomas saw Carver again. The old man appeared on the horizon at sunset, walking toward the ranch. Thomas met him at the fence line. "I tried to warn you," Carver said. No greeting, no preamble. Thomas held up his hand. The spiral patterns were more visible now, a deep blue against his skin. "I barely touched anything. It doesn't matter. The pool, the walls, the air down there, it's all the same, all part of it. And now you're part of it too." Carver's pale eyes were sad. "I'm sorry. I should have been there sooner, should have stopped you before you went into that chamber. What happens now? Now you learn to live with it. The visions, the whispers, the patterns, they'll never go away. But you can learn to manage them, to push them to the background. I can teach you, if you'll let me. It's not much, but it's something." Thomas looked at his hand, then at the barn where the entrance was sealed. "Did those things get out? The ones from the pool?" "No. The ceiling held. They're bound to that place, can't exist outside it for long. But they're still there, still waiting. They're always waiting." Carver gestured toward the mountains. "There are others like us, changed people. Some who touched the pools by accident like you. Some who did it deliberately, seeking power or knowledge. We find each other eventually, help each other cope. It's a small community, scattered and secret, but it exists." "My father," Thomas said suddenly. "Did he?" Carver shook his head. "No. He was smart enough to keep his distance, studied the symbols from afar, read the books, but never went deep enough to be marked. That's why he could walk away, why he could live a normal life. You won't have that." Thomas felt something inside him crumble. Normal life. His father had kept this secret not just to protect others, but to protect him. And now, through his own foolish curiosity, he'd lost that protection forever. "Will I change more?" he asked quietly. "Yes, over years, maybe decades. You'll age slower. Like me. You'll need less sleep, less food. The patterns will become easier to see. And sometimes, in your dreams, you'll find yourself back in those chambers, walking those tunnels. Not really, not physically, but part of you will be there, drawn back to where it all began. The pools call to those they've marked, always calling, always pulling. You have to learn to resist." Thomas was silent for a long moment. Then he asked, "Is there any chance it will fade, that I might return to normal?" The look on Carver's face told him everything he needed to know. "No, I'm sorry. But you will adapt. You'll find a way to live with it. Most of us do. And there are advantages, strange as that sounds. You'll understand things others can't. See connections, patterns in nature, in time, in the way the world works. It's not all terrible, though. I know it feels that way now." Thomas nodded slowly. He felt numb, disconnected from his own body. This morning he'd been a simple rancher. Now he was something else. Something changed. His father's words echoed in his mind. He'd never come back the same. And he hadn't. He'd left something of himself down in that chamber, and something else had come back in its place. "Teach me," he said finally. "Teach me how to live with this." Carver placed a hand on his shoulder. "I will. It won't be easy, but you're not alone. That's the important thing. You're not alone." As the sun set over the Arizona Territory, casting long shadows across the valley, Thomas Brennan looked toward his barn. The entrance was sealed, buried beneath concrete and stone, but he knew it was still there, still waiting in the darkness below. The tunnel, the chambers, the pool with its dark liquid and its impossible depth. And though he could never go back, though he'd sealed that doorway as tightly as he could, he knew the truth that would haunt him for the rest of his unnaturally long life. Some doors, once opened, never truly close again. They remain, somewhere in the spaces between, waiting for those brave or foolish enough to walk through. His father had understood that. Carver understood it, and now Thomas understood it too. He would live with this mark. He would learn to see the patterns, to hear the whispers without going mad. He would continue working his ranch, raising his cattle, living his life as normally as he could manage. But he would never be the same man who descended those wooden steps on that September morning. That man was gone, left behind in the darkness beneath the barn. In his place stood someone new, someone changed, someone who knew that the world was larger and stranger than most people could imagine, someone who carried ancient spirals in his skin and heard voices in languages that predated human memory. Thomas Brennan had found a tunnel beneath his old barn. He'd entered it, seeking answers to mysteries he barely understood. And he'd been right about one thing, right in a way he'd never wanted to be. He would never come back the same.